Thanks. We're not winning, but we do have two guys on base, and only down a couple runs. Anyway, thank you and good evening. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight to talk about a number of topics that are dear to me: dreams, baseball, and America and its values. And also, importantly, to introduce a man who's very dear to me, Commissioner Emeritus Alan H. Bud Selig, who is the personification of all of those. Now, I've introduced the Commissioner a number of times, and if I were to chronicle tonight his lengthy list of accomplishments and civic endeavors, I would exceed the time that's been allotted for both of us to speak. So I'll offer some brief comments on the themes of this exhibit and on my relationship with Bud Selig. Let's start with the title of the exhibit, which is Chasing Dreams. One of the many reasons that baseball is viewed as America's pastime is it mirrors trends in our society. And one of the great things about America is that it's a melting pot of people who came here for the opportunity that this country offers to make their dreams come true. As Bud Selig often says, he had big dreams as a boy growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I also had an abiding dream when I was growing up in the Bronx, New York, although mine was to play center field for the New York Yankees, like my idol Mickey Mantle. Interestingly, Henry Aaron, who grew up in Mobile, Alabama, and his wife Billy, who grew up in Georgia, organized their charitable activities through their Chasing the Dream Foundation. Next, I thought I'd make a comment on me and the Commissioner Emeritus. Milwaukee writer Chad Harbach is the author of a best-selling novel a couple of years ago, The Art of Fielding. And he once wrote in Grantland on ESPN.com that I presented Milwaukee as the anti-Selig. He wrote that I'm an East Coast Ivy Leaguer, that I made clockwise progress around the country, born in the Bronx, founded an investment firm based in Dallas, sold that investment firm to a firm based in Los Angeles, and kind of worked around the country in that way before I came to Milwaukee to buy the Brewers. Bud, on the other hand, as we know, is Wisconsin born and bred and was educated at the University of Wisconsin. And virtually all of his business interests were in Milwaukee and the state of Wisconsin, including working in the automobile business with his father. So I lost my spot. Just acquired. There it is. I did not memorize the speech. And I'm usually working on like a handheld device, and I thought I'd try these cards tonight, so we may have to get the cards next time. Anyway, when it comes, so we appear different. You know, I grew up in the East Coast and have worked in several parts around the country, and Bud has always been, you know, intensely loyal and centered in Wisconsin. Yet, when it comes to a boy's bare passion for the game and an adult's commitment to the sport as a social institution, a commitment based on a firm belief that baseball is an integral part of the fabric of a community, I believe that Bud Selig and I are extremely well matched, or at a minimum, to advance the Taoist principle here at the Jewish Museum, Milwaukee, we are yin and yang, complementary and interconnected. I'll also mention that we also share a passion for contemporary art and for intelligent Jewish women under the height of 5'4". Getting a little look from Sue there. His wife Sue and my wife Debbie. By the way, I'll mention that Tyler Barnes, who runs Brewers Communications, should had an edit, he said I should have added in stunning, intelligent Jewish woman, which I'll accept. Sue thinks that's better. Finally, the focus of this exhibit is that baseball is a pathway for minority groups, be they Jews, African Americans, Italians, Latin Americans, Japanese, to know and understand America's values. Our country's best ideals are realized through creativity and consistent, determined hard work. I'm often asked to speak to college students, and I always emphasize that along with a little luck, there is no substitute for hard work. And when it comes to working hard, no one in baseball, and I mean no one, worked harder than Bud Selig when he was the commissioner. You could get him on the phone, to Sue's consternation, although I will say with Sue's complete support, pretty much any time of the day or night, and pretty much no matter wherever he was or whatever else he was doing at that time. Right, Sue? And when it comes to creativity, no commissioner ever devised more productive solutions for our sport than Bud Selig. Revenue sharing, interleague play, the expanded playoff format, the creation of MLB Advanced Media, which allows us all to watch virtually every game in Major League Baseball, all 2,430 of them on a handheld phone or tablet, which I'm doing right now, actually. And of course, an unparalleled 21 years of labor peace, a result of extremely hard work, but also a result of creativity in coming up with solutions to seemingly intractable problems. Both as an owner of the Milwaukee Brewers and as the commissioner of Major League Baseball, Bud Selig dedicated his life, every hour of every day, to advancing the best interests of baseball, and often in ways that no one could imagine. Only in America could a boy from a minority group in a small city in the middle part of the country impact so many people around the world in such a profound way by chasing his dream and honoring America's core values. This man truly embodies all the principles of this special exhibit, which I hope you'll all get to see tonight. It's my honor to introduce Commissioner Emeritus Alan H. Bud Selig.
Thank you, Mark, for your very kind words. Incidentally, I'm going to ad-lib a lot through all this, but when I was a kid growing up here, Joe DiMaggio was my hero. And I honestly thought I was the next center fielder of the New York Yankees. The problem was when I was 14 years old, some guy had the unmitigated temerity to throw a curveball. And I wound up in the dirt, and I knew then my career was over. So, Mickey Mantle notwithstanding. Well, it's a great pleasure for me to be here today, and frankly, only fitting for the theme for the evening is chasing a dream. And obviously, I've been very lucky in my life because I've lived a dream that I chased as a young boy growing up on the west side of Milwaukee. I believe in dreams, and I want to say this at the outset. I believe that individuals should dream big dreams, limitless dreams, because only then can one reach his or her full potential. As the great Irish playwright George Bernard Shaw once said, "You see things and you say why, but I dream things that never were, and I say, why not?" And so, my friend Bud Giamatti, who was president of the Yale, became commissioner, and tragically died 5 months in office, always described, and you're going to hear me say this a lot tonight, baseball is a metaphor for life. He once wrote in an essay that made a deep impact on me, The Green Fields of the Mind. And he said about baseball, which I wish I could have written like him and said things that showed the impact in society. It breaks your heart. It is designed to break your heart. The game begins in the spring when everything else begins. And it blossoms in the summer, filling the afternoons and evenings. And then as soon as the chill rains come, it stops and leaves you to face the fall alone. You count on it, and you rely on it to buffer the passage of time, to keep the memory of sunshine and high skies alive. And then just when the days are twilight, when you need it the most, it stops and summer is gone. Now, I want to say that the Selig experience, which Mark and Debbie and Brett, Kate put on, and I hope all of you, if you haven't seen it, will see it, is just remarkable. Because it captures the history and the very things that I'm talking about here tonight, the likes of which I couldn't imagine and I've never seen. But a student asked me in Madison a couple of months ago, what event triggered, because I talked to them about baseball as a social institution. As Mark knows, the owners heard that at every meeting. And it is a social institution for a myriad of ways. And I guess the one event I can go back, I was a 23-year-old kid, out of school, out of service. The Milwaukee Braves were September 23rd, 1957 to be exact. We're trying to win the National League pennant. I had, at my father's urging, in those days, you know, you did what your father asked you to do, and had me taking an accounting course. Now, with all due respect to any accountants in the audience, my mother was a teacher. I never cut a class, but I hated that class. I hate accounting to this day. I hate the principles of accounting. And I was driving down the freeway thinking to myself, the Braves have a chance to win the pennant tonight. What the hell am I going to do sitting in this idiotic class that has already become painful and it's only September? So I veered off the freeway, parked 9 miles away, went up and bought, they had some obstructed view seats, and it was obstructed right behind a big metal post. Those of you who remember County Stadium. And to make a very long story short, in the 11th inning, the great Henry Allen hit a home run off of Billy Muffet, Cardinal relief pitcher, and the Braves won the pennant. And I saw pandemonium the likes of seen. But the next day, in the New York Times, was a wonderful piece, showed Henry Aaron being carried off the field by his mainly white teammates, and juxtaposed right alongside of it was Orville Faubus in Little Rock, Arkansas, spraying kids, African Americans, who were really trying to go to school. And that picture made an enormous impact upon me. I have it today. The New York Times heard me tell this story a lot, and Henry's heard me tell the story. But it was then I began to understand that we are a social institution, we being baseball, in every way. And so here was this dramatic, really, really dramatic event. And so it was later, as I was in baseball, and began to watch things, and began to understand that chasing the dream is not only fulfilling, but what you could do with chasing the dream. And I guess the story that I would say today that was done so well upstairs is Jackie Roosevelt Robinson. Branch Rickey signed him to a contract for the Montreal Club in 1945. Jackie Robinson appears in Evansville, Brooklyn on April 15, 1947, breaking the color barrier. Branch Rickey, who was the president and general manager of the Dodgers, had more courage than anybody. The clubs had voted 15-1 6 months earlier not to allow any Negroes, as they said in those days, to play in the big leagues. Well, when you look back on everything, and I'm thinking of many things I'm proudest, the night of the Selig experience was that Rachel Robinson came at age 92 to that event. Her daughter Sharon, of course, works for us too. But think about that, and think about, again, we'll go back to the social institution. Branch Rickey has the courage, 2.5 or 3 years before Harry Truman desegregates the United States Army, 7 years before Brown versus the Board of Education, and 18 years before the Civil Rights Movement. But it was Ken Griffey Jr., who's going to go in the Hall of Fame next year. Great player, a wonderful young man. And he said to me, Commissioner, I hope I'm not bothering you, but I got an idea that I hope you'll go along with. And I want to give him proper credit. He said there's so much symbolism in the Jackie Robinson story. Will you let every player in baseball wear 42 on April 15th? And I thought about it, and I'm just very cautious, as everybody knows, particularly Sue. And I said, let me think about it till tomorrow, but I knew damn well I was going to let him do it. And sure enough, the next morning I called him, and he did it, and every player today wears 42. And so, it is, as I watched that exhibit, and watched the Selig experience, and watched the other things, I understand how fortunate I've been. You couldn't have forecast, and I couldn't have even thought about all the things that were going to happen to me. People have asked me about the 5.5 years once the Braves left Milwaukee, a heartbreaking story, where the odds were really stacked against us. I guess I was too young. I didn't realize how high those odds were. They were stunningly stacked against us. But I'll tell you a story that made me know that I could never quit, and I wouldn't. The last game the Braves played in Milwaukee was in September of 1965. They were playing the Los Angeles Dodgers, and the great Sandy Koufax, of all people, was pitching. Well, the Dodgers won the game, but that's neither here nor there. But during the game, I was sitting with a partner of mine, Ed Fitzgerald, and a woman came up to me and said, "Are you Bud Selig?" And people were, it was an emotional crowd, very emotional crowd. I said, "Yeah." And I remember Ed Fitzgerald said to me, "Uh-oh, what you do now?" But I don't think I did anything. She's a handicapped woman. It was a very prominent family, and they had her that will forever stay with me. And she said, "Don't you fail. You're all we got. And do you know how much this means to me and people like me?" And with that she wept and turned and walked away. And so for the next 5.5 years, there were a lot of really discouraging moments. Got turned down by the National League, got turned down by the American League for expansion, thought we had the Chicago White Sox, bought, and we did. And we were sort of at the end. And I remember we then started with the Seattle Pilots, and it was touch and go. And history always hangs by a thin thread in everything in life. And I believe that was it for us. Fortunately, couldn't find a buyer in Seattle on the night of March 31st, 1970. The Milwaukee Brewers were born. And it was really an amazing story. And so, it was hard to imagine how a dream, and I dreamed it every day for those 5.5 years, down to the last detail, and all of a sudden, with the stroke of a judge's pen in Seattle, Washington, my dream became a success. And so, you understand more as I walk through the exhibit here. You think of Hank Greenberg in a city in the 30s, Detroit. Father Coughlin, a whole bunch of racists, sad to say Henry Ford I, many others. And yet Hank Greenberg was their hero. And he took a lot of abuse. But he weathered it. And by the way, it's just a big story. In 1947, he had been traded to Pittsburgh, and Jackie Robinson was having a particularly tough day. People throwing at his head, trying to spike him. He got to first base, and Jackie wrote this himself. Hank Greenberg said to him, "You're doing great, kid. Don't let him get you down. You're going to be all right." And Jackie never forgot that. The wonderful story there. And so, my friend Doris Kearns Goodwin wrote, "The game of baseball has always been linked in my mind with the mystic texture of childhood, with the sounds and smells of summer nights, and most important, with the memories of my father." And so, the more you see, as Mark so beautifully said, the fact of the matter is, the sport has been a melting pot. It has been a great melting pot. It has been a melting pot in so many different ways that when you look at it today, and you look when Sandy Koufax, for instance, came in the 60s, dominating the sport. There was one tough problem for Sandy, greatest pitcher for a 7-8 year period I ever saw. But it's been said then, and I'd say it here tonight, the only problem for every Jewish mother in America, they were trying to figure out how to get their daughter to meet Sandy There are a lot of, I've thought all day long about chasing the dream and stories, and I've written a million of them down here, but there are a couple I'd like to tell you because they emphasize the sociality of our sport, which has been the favorite part of my life the last 57 years. There's a million stories I could tell, but in 1982, remember we won the pennant, lost the World Series. And it was painful. Great year, a lot of great things. You watched it bind the community together. And that's the wonderful part of baseball. It binds the community together in so many different ways. I was having lunch a couple of weeks later. A little drive-in I go to, as most of you know. And a man walked in, actually a lawyer in Wauwatosa, didn't know that at the time. And I'm still pouting about the game. mad the volley fingers have been hurt, and I'll be giving you all the excuses. And those of you who know me well, Dr. Jacobs, other people here, my wife above all, I was not a good loser. There were many a temper tantrum. My language was bad, but it's still bad. I can't apologize. When a man walks in and he said to me, and he points his finger, and I don't know, God. He said, you don't know what you've done. You don't know the impact that you make on people. This dream that you had, I wish you could understand how meaningful it is. So now, everybody in the place is quiet. And he's very, very blunt. He said, you know, I got 2 tickets for the last game against the Angels, which they won, obviously. And he said, I called my son, who I've had lots of trouble with. He's telling the story of his life. And he said, he shocked me. And he said, oh, I'd love to go to the game. We went to the game. It was a great game. A little too tense for me, but it was a terrific game. And afterwards, he said, I figured my son would say, well, that's, you know, I got to go and goodbye. And he said, let's go downtown and watch him celebrate. We did. And he said, we had a wonderful day. And we got home. He said, my son said something to me that he hadn't said in 3 or 4 years, 5 years, and may never say again. He said, Dad, I'll never forget this day, and I love you. And with that, the man broke down and left the building. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, if all of us can really appreciate the privilege that we have and the things that we have, then you understand what baseball means and its great hold on people and the good that it can do. And so I've seen it over and over again. The mayor of Detroit in 1967 and 68, where they're having terrible riots, as you remember, giving the Tigers credit in 68 for calming things down because they were on the way to winning the pennant and playing in the World Series and winning the World Series that year. And the mayor said, but for the Tigers playing in Tiger Stadium on the corner of Michigan and Trumbull, downtown Detroit, never would have happened. And I can go on and on and on. It's, I guess George Bernard Shaw's comment is the best thing, but I know we're going to do a lot of questions and answers. But on my last night as a commissioner, we were in New York. Sue and I, and the New York writers gave me their highest award, and it was a wonderful evening, huge crowd. And I had the privilege, by the way, of sitting next to Sandy Koufax, who I think can still pitch better at Mark than a lot of guys that have pitched. I didn't say Brewers, I said a lot of guys pitching in the Midwest. Very careful.
We know what you might have meant.
And I did. I had a wonderful, wonderful evening with him. But when I got all done with the speech, and it was really emotional, and I was bringing a 52 or 53-year career to at least some closure in that sport, I said some words which I used again at this came out for me. I said at the Selig experience. I said, what you've seen here, I'm thanking him, is one of those rare instances in life where a little boy's dreams did come true. And so, what I try to say to, especially my students now, and what I try to say in the book that I'm writing, George Bernard Shaw was right. if you believe in something, you really believe in it, then with every fiber of energy in your body for the next X period of years, you've got to make those dreams come true. Unfortunately, I've had a vehicle, the greatest game in the world. Thank you very much. I think, Josh, for questions and answers. Only one condition. Years ago in Milwaukee, of all places, I was given a speech, and because I love Q&A, I love bantering about. A woman raised her hand, and then she put it down. What's a man? Oh, she said, it's a nasty question. And I said, let me tell you something. When I took over in 1992, I was a quiet, thoughtful, sensitive kid. I don't have any feelings left. You can't hurt them. So, please, I'm glad. There's so much I could have covered. I had pages of note, and I've written many experience things that have happened to me. But please, just raise your hand, and maybe Sue. I thought maybe Sue, you or Paul Jacob want to talk about my temper tantrum.
When you were the general manager of the Brewers, when somebody came up from the minor leagues, how did you feel about them? Like, did you know that they were going to be better in the majors than they were in the minors?
Well, I was never general manager, and I'm going to say this to you about that, but I'll answer your question. The only trade I ever made, we were in between general managers, and I got lucky. And I was smart enough to quit before it didn't anymore. But I was we were at a major league meeting, and my friend Dick O'Connell, so you're the only one here who remember Dick O'Connell, who was a general manager of the Boston Red Sox, tough, crusty old guy, came up to me and said, the old man, he was talking about Tom Yawkey, imagine what they must say about me today, he said, the old man wants George Boomer Scott back. Well, I was so happy I couldn't believe it. I went over to Dee Fonte, who was our scouting director and in the interim general manager, and he looked at me crazy, and I said, who do we want? And he says, you know who we want. We wanted Cecil Cooper. We really liked him. And, but he said, get him to take Carbo back, because he's a pain in the you-know-what. And so I went back over to Dick. He says, the old man wants to make it right away. Tom Yawkey was that way once. So I went back and said, I don't know, but if you'll take Carbo, you got a deal. He says, you got a deal. Cecil Cooper for the next 10 years was as great a hitter there was in baseball, and I quit being the general manager. Let me try to answer your question, and it is, as Mark knows, it's difficult when you bring young players up. You just don't know. There are certain instances. I remember coming to spring training in 1974, and Del Crandall, great base catcher, who was our manager at the time, said, we're going to play the kid at shortstop. I said, who are you talking? Down. He played 2 months at Newark, New York. He's not ready for it. He said he's going to struggle, but he's going to be a great player. Turned out he was right. The only other, I could sit here all day and give you examples. I'd give you plenty of guys who didn't make it either, if you really want to get it. But we drafted Paul Molitor, third. We were number 3 in 1977. We were lucky. There were two players taken before Molitor. One was Harold Bain, who's pretty damn good. But Molitor was Molitor. And our scouting director at that time, Dee Fonte, said to me, this kid can't miss. And I said, well, I've heard that before. Mark, right, I've heard everything until you hear all this stuff. But I got to spring training in '78, and George Bamberger, my favorite all-time baseball people, said, I can't tell you the way he told me. I try to clean this up as much as I can. He said, that little son of a bitch we got from Minnesota, we call him the Igniter. He'll be in the Hall of Fame someday. he turned out to be one. He was the igniter, and he turned out to be in time. So I could give you a lot, but it's a good question.
Commissioner, what was the best part and what was the hardest part of your transition from being owner of the Milwaukee Brewers to commissioner of Major League Baseball?
Well, you know, one of the things that I agonized over for a long time, in between 92 to 98, nobody could figure out why I was taking so long, including Sue. You know, I was a very passionate fan. And by the way, speak of that, I guess 1 second. The one thing, certainly in our business, but I believe in anything in life, if you are not passionate and you do not care greatly and you do not live and die with it, you shouldn't be in the business. You certainly shouldn't be in sports. There's nothing wrong with passion and caring, but that's true in everything in life. So that was the most difficult thing. I wondered what I could do. The history of commissioners, without me getting into it, you know, it was a very tough job. There have been a number of commissioners that had been asked to leave, but I didn't worry much about that because we were already doing things that it was, but I just worried. I knew this. The job of the commissioner, basic job, is to, in a myriad of ways, to protect the integrity of the sport. And do all the things that we talked about here. All the things we talked about here. And so, I just had to make sure that I could do that. And once I became convinced I could. Now, you know, in January at the last meeting in Phoenix, a lot of owners came up and said, well, now, buddy, you can now root for your team openly. And I agreed with them and with Mark, so it is a fact. But that was, it is for, you know, the commissioner's job, we talked about chasing a dream, and that's another thing I have to say to you. A student in another class in Madison said, how did you go, and it was a serious question. It was a very smart young lady, as a matter of fact. She said to me, how did you go from leaving here, Madison, to wanting to be a history professor, which is precisely what I wanted to be, to becoming commissioner of baseball? And I said, it's too long a story and it has too many ups and downs. But again, Bart Giamatti was right. Baseball is a metaphor for life, and if you study life, you see all types of things that happen in that story. So that's how it happened. Yes, sir.
What was your relationship with George Steinbrenner like, and do you have a favorite Steinbrenner story you can share?
We could be here all night. Well, let me say this to you. That's a great question, because George came into baseball in December of 1972. I had already been in 2 or 3 years. And at the first meeting, he said he wasn't going to do much. Mike Burke was there, and he was going to run the Yankees, and you know, he was in the shipbuilding business, and of course a month later Mike Burke was fired and George was running the Yankees. So here are 2 guys that came in, and we got along well right from the start. But we never agreed on anything. I mean, I'm sitting in Milwaukee with 600,000 households, he's sitting in New York with 11 million households, and we were just beginning to get into revenue sharing and all. But George, somehow we just hit it off well. We were both with George and his wife, and Sue and I, we hit it off, but he was difficult. Now he and Bowie Q, then commissioner, really hated each other. I mean, this was a legitimate hatred. I mean, there was no nonsense. And so Bowie would call me, or my mentor, John Fetzer, who owned the Detroit Tigers, who was a great man, great man. I was, again, very fortunate along the way, because he didn't have any children. He took me under his wing from the moment I walked into baseball. Either one would call me, and George was acting badly, and he'd say, you got to call George. Bowie couldn't call him because George wouldn't take his call. If he did, he'd call him every name in the book. So I call him. And the calls always, here's the way they went. Oh, they got the golden boy calling me again. I finally told him one day, get another effing message. Just say something different, just to make me happy. So, that's what would happen. Bang! My assistant, Lori Keck, who worked for 37 years, followed by Mary Burns. Lori Keck once said, and she was Vince Lombardi's secretary, and George loved Vince Lombardi. I guess I'll digress just a second. Lori's a wonderful person, smart as could be, but she hated when we played day games and she had to watch me parade back and forth on the road, listen to the radio, swear, go out, come back, the language got worse, things got thrown. It was, no, that's not exaggeration. And I once walked back in there, we had just won the game, I'm feeling good. Just like you, Rex. Your temper tantrums are about the same. And I heard her say to Barbara Stark, who of course worked in the office, well, how smart can I have been? I worked for 2 madmen in my life. But getting back to George, so here you have this split. George came to Milwaukee a lot. He loved talking to Lori because he talked about Vince Lombardi. But I want to say this to you about it, and we never agreed on anything. He sued baseball a couple times. I got him to... He's one of the first people that talked to me about becoming the commissioner. And as tough as he could be, when he was your friend, he was really your friend. If he liked you, he was great. If he hated you, that's another story. But in all the years that George was alive, and I was a commissioner, and he's one of the first people, as I said, who talked to me about it, never fought revenue sharing, wound up paying over $100 million. You would have guessed way back when he was sued, he did it. And so, I have to say to you, from my long, long experience with him, we went to see him right before he passed away. Georgie was okay. He was okay. One thing about him, you always knew where he stood. I'm not being facetious when I say that. You didn't have to guess. And, well, he did some things he shouldn't have done, and treated some people the way he shouldn't. And from a personal standpoint, we had a great relationship.
Yeah,
One more.
It's nostalgia time. I'm going to go all the way back to 51st Boulevard and Sherman School and the baseball team that you played on during recess and during lunch hour and all the guys on that team. Would you want to tell us a little bit about that and how that, what effect that had on you for your future life?
Well, obviously I love the game already. You know, Herb Cole tells this pathetic story. That when we were in 6th grade, I'm glad he's not here tonight because I've heard the damn story 400 times. So I'll beat anybody to punch about it. I was the captain of my team, he was the captain of his team. And he and I'd go over to Sherman School and play strikeout, and oh my God, we were there hours and hours and hours. I told you I was going to be at next place, Joe DiMaggio. Anyway, we won the game. He to this day claims that I brought in a ringer. And the ringer pitched a no-hit game. Well, the ringer was a classmate. The guy's name was Jack Halser. And the sad part is that Jack just passed away a month ago, and I told Herb Cole, you buried him by telling that story. So the fact of the matter is that the game was in my blood even then. I didn't realize it. You know, my mother started taking me to games when I was 3 or 4 years old. And you know, an unusual innocence, incidents of how it happened. My mother is the one that really got me interested in baseball. She used to listen to Brewer games when they were at Orchard Field. Started going to Orchard Field. Somebody reminded me here tonight, I had a cousin who was a professor at the University of Chicago, and Herb and I went down in May of 1947. And we saw Jackie Robinson in his first game at Wrigley Field. And I remember sitting in the upper deck in Wrigley and looking around. I was 13 years old. And we were the only white people in the upper deck. And it was a tremendous experience to watch how excited people were and how dramatic it was and how much it meant to them. And so all these things over the years, and to understand why I believe that, as I said to you, baseball is a metaphor for life, but more importantly, is a social institution. Thank you very much.